killing. Once you've heard her story, I don't think you can help but be moved. Thank you, Caroline.
On 13th of July 2013, a fire took place not far from here at Paul's Hair World on Oldham Street. Tragically, firefighter Steve Hunt lost his life whilst tackling the blaze. But Steve was not the only casualty of this fire. My husband, Lee Gaunt, father to our two boys, Matthew and Nicholas, was in attendance that day. He'd been at the fire for many hours and had become concerned about the safety of the firefighters due to the ferocity of the blaze and the temperatures outside. It had been the hottest day of the year so far. He'd been at the fire. Lee felt that nobody had listened to his concerns and had become increasingly agitated about how the fire was being managed and his capabilities regarding the role he had been given. It was that of a higher-ranking fire officer. Unfortunately, Lee's fears were realised when Steve was pulled from the building. For weeks after, Lee was tormented by thoughts of what he should or could have done to prevent the tragedy. He dreamed about Stephen, and eventually Lee tried to take his own life. Following this, he was placed on sick leave for a few weeks and received 6 sessions of counselling. He was then deemed fit to resume his duties as a fire officer. Lee never at any point saw a trained psychiatric nurse or a psychologist. I, however, knew that Lee was not fit to return to work, as he still couldn't sleep and panicked about similar incidents ever happening again. He would read operational procedures over and over again and highlighted and annotated anything relevant to the incident where Steve's life was lost. Lee's colleagues were aware of his difficulties and, in their own words, knew how to handle him and calm him down. It wasn't long before Lee moved fire stations to be closer to home and worked for a station officer that was a great guy and close family friend. Unfortunately, it was only a matter of weeks before he decided to retire, and this left Lee in charge of the watch, a role that he had never wanted and wasn't qualified to do. He started panicking again and about turning out to big jobs like Oldham Street. I advised him to discuss this with his station manager. Unfortunately, the station manager informed him it was going to be at least 6 months before a replacement could be found, as the manning was so low due to government cutbacks. Over the next few weeks, Lee became more and more anxious, but accepted that he had no other choice than to continue acting up or alternatively go off sick. Frightened to death of being finished on the grounds of capabilities, he chose to continue and count the days till a replacement could be found to take the pressure from Lee, who was now doing the job of 2 officers. A couple of weeks later, he was hit with another bombshell. His station was to be inspected, and the inspection was set for a day when he was on duty. Already struggling to cope, this only served to compound Lee's anxiety about his own capabilities. He began to prepare feverishly, training and retraining his crew on procedures and drills, and with the inquest into Steve Hunt's death looming, where Lee would be called to give evidence, Lee began to crumble. I contacted a couple of his colleagues to express my concerns about his mental state, and I know they did their best to reassure him that he'd be okay, and sometimes they seemed to get through. But in no time at all, he'd whir himself back into a panic, where he'd lie awake all night or sit at the computer for hours on end. Lee's work colleagues were worried about his mental state, also saying he'd begun to freeze on arrival at jobs and was acting very, very strangely under pressure. On the evening of the 17th of October, Lee was on duty. I begged him not to go to work, but he was frightened of being dismissed, so he went. Lee spent most of the evening in the lecture room with his crew again, going over and over things they would be asked during the inspection. Later on, his bleeper went off to notify him that they were needed to attend a suspected cardiac arrest. The pager lost signal, as was the norm, and Lee was unable to mobilise his crew to attend. He became so distressed about the thought of a member of the public needing their assistance and that they were unable to attend to help him. A member of the crew tried to reassure Lee that the problem was with the pager system and not with Lee's competence. The crew then settled down for the night, leaving Lee alone in the office. Shortly after, while the rest of the crew were resting, Lee left the fire station and at the back of the yard took his own life. He'd hung himself from a tree. The crew did their best to save his life, but unfortunately it was too late. Since these events, a full analysis of Lee's medical records, counselling notes and the events surrounding his death were fully examined, and Lee was retrospectively diagnosed with PTSD as a direct result of the incident on Oldham Street, where Steve Hunt lost his life. Can't help feeling that if he were given the correct support after the incident and being referred to the appropriate professionals at the time, that Lee would still be here. And the constant threat of being finished on the grounds of capabilities led him to continue to work even though he was not fit enough. I know that since Lee's death, the fire service have abandoned the pager system, changed their occupational health providers, and are trying to deal better with mental health problems. Hopefully this will prevent anything happening again. Unfortunately, this was all too late for Lee.
Thanks, Mick. And as Mick said, I want to begin by thanking Hilda and Janet at the Greater Manchester Hazard Centre for their crucial role in organising this great event today, and for all the work they do in promoting health, safety and welfare at work. We're very lucky to have the Hazard Centre here in Manchester. This year is the 30th anniversary of the centre, and it has consistently promoted the need for regulation and enforcement. Hazards has highlighted disasters at home and abroad, including the Piper Alpha disaster, the campaign for justice in Bhopal, and the collapse of the Razaplana factory in Bangladesh. The Hazards campaign and the excellent Hazards magazine consistently remind us that regulation and scrutiny are essential to protecting the health and safety of workers and indeed of the public. And colleagues, we all had a reminder of that truth when in June last year with the terrible disaster at the Grenfell Tower. I think we can all remember where we were when we heard about that horrific fire. Our thoughts go out to those who died and those who are still suffering such grief at their loss. It is a human disaster that caused great suffering for families and for a whole community. And on this International Workers' Memorial Day, I want to express our sympathy and solidarity, because this was a disaster that didn't need to happen. There was no need for people to be put in harm's way and to be put at such risk. For over the last 40 years, our governments have piled more and more risks onto ordinary people, cutting back on public spending, cutting social provision, cutting regulation, cutting rights and living standards. They all make us more insecure and create greater risk. And the rich and powerful of this country, they're willing to take risks. They'll take risks with other people's jobs. They'll take risks with other people's well-being, with our living standards, and even with other people's lives. In fact, in this country, in 2016-17 alone, almost 1,500 people died in work-related incidents, and over 51,000 from work-related illnesses. Over 52,000 lives in 1 year. What a national scandal. And we know that when profit is the main consideration, it puts people at risk. when health and safety is ridiculed by politicians and the media, it puts people at risk. When there isn't enough investment in proper inspections, it puts people at risk. When the views and concerns of trade unions and workers are ignored, it puts people at risk. And we need a better society where we do our best to protect each other from risk. This has to mean investing in workplace safety and in the public services that we all rely on. We need a serious change across a whole range of issues. We need our NHS to be properly funded so people know they can access it when they need it. We need a humane welfare system that does not subject vulnerable people to pressure and insecurity. We need a better transport system, run for the public good and not for profit, where we keep guards on the train. We need our councils to have the funding they need to provide quality services and to be able to respond to the needs of their communities. We need our emergency services to have the staff and equipment they need. We need safe and secure workplaces with a stronger inspection regime, enforcement of health and safety standards, including proper state funding of the Health and Safety Executive. But above all, as Angie said, we know that union workplaces are safer workplaces. We need more workers in unions. We need more safety reps, and we need more collective action to enforce our rights. The solution, comrades, is in our own hands. If we want safe workplaces, then we must organise to ensure that all workplaces are unionised. As we say in our rallying call on this important occasion, the best way to remember the dead, to honour the memory of our lost brothers and sisters, of our lost sons and daughters, is to fight for the living. Thank you.
We remember the dead, all those many hundreds across the northwest who have died due to exposure to asbestos. To read all of their names will take many hours and many tears, but we do remember them, each and every one of them, and we commit ourselves to fight for the living.
We remember the dead, the hundreds of workers killed in work-related incidents across the northwest every year. The 5,000 plus killed by all work-related illnesses, such as heart disease, lung diseases and cancers, like the asbestos cancers across the northwest. We remember those loved ones whose deaths led to the setting up of Families Against Corporate Killers: Samuel Adams, Andy Herbertson, Mark Bright, Lewis Murphy, Andrew Houghton, Craig Whelan, Michael Adamson. And we remember Craig's mum, Linda, who died of cancer and a broken heart. And I'd especially like to remember today Hannah Kirkham and Mark Seward. We do not know the names of most of the workers in the northwest who've died because the HSE doesn't count them or properly record them. We read out the names of those we know who were killed in work incidents in the northwest between April 2010 and today. We remember all those workers in the service sector and the water and waste management sectors: David Astley, Tony Schultz, Zbigniew Galka, Eamon Cavill, Stephen Garrett, Niall Page, Dorothy Ann Harts, Grant Kinney, Susan Brooks, Daniel Law, Christopher Morris, Mahesh Ramasinghe, Ricky Guest Binns, Brian John Pownell, Ernest Horton, Craig Gray, Malcolm Harrison, Philip Davis, Carl Morris, Michael Malloy, Kerry Ogden and Colin Dolby, Edward Evans, John Bassett, Russell Joslin, Mike Proctor, Fiona Bone, Nicola Hughes, Darren Morley, Paul Williamson, George Howley, Robbie Williamson, Nigel Chester and Terry Lewis.
We remember the dead and we fight for the living. Daniel Adams, Mark Foley, Gary Blundell, Jason Aslam, Peter Sahaj, Craig Jones, Javid Iqbal, Mohammed Yassin, Clive Stedman, Caroline Bailey, Scott Gibson, Delroy Finney, Russell Morris, Olympio Ogunjobi, John Burns, Christopher Allen Preston, Mohammed Nalia, Stephen Hunt and Lee Gaunt.
Remember the dead, fight for the living. Adam Gibb, Andrew Summerscales, Paul Daniels, Lorraine Bowl, Thomas Ashcroft, Mick Densmore, Mark Parry, Tristan Nuttall, Ronald Lowe, Wayne Lannan, Ian Ewart, Kevin Wyman, Kevin Rice, Stephen Yarborough, Craig Gill, Alexandra Bullard, Carl Greenaway, Cassie Hayes. We also especially remember those who are driven to despair to take their own lives on the railway system, and all train drivers and crew who are also deeply affected.
We remember the dead, all those workers in manufacturing who have died since 2010. Stanley Ian Hurd, James Bibby, Thomas Elmer, Graham Begley, Robert Dunrow, Alan Catterall, Chris Cowan, Liam O'Neill, Leslie Brown, Martin McGlasson, Jason Pennington, Michael Wickstead, Michael Smith, Craig Allen Phillips, Mohammed Shakil Abu, Andrew Bowes, Christopher Williams, George Spalder, Richard Ferris, Bruce Dempsey, and Nathan Brown.
John Flowers, Gray Jackson, Michael Moran, Ian Alwilski, Sean Dodgson, Richard Carlson, Richard Reddish, David Miller, Jezak Gasamowicz, Derek Moore, Dorothy Bailey, Derek Barks, Jason Singler, Francis Dunn, Wayne Mallinson, Paul Andrews, William Babe Taylor. We remember them.
We remember the dead, all those construction workers since April 2010. Peter Cochran, James Dennis Kay, Lee Bourne, Matthew Nixon, Andrew Dytich, James Sim, Edward Fitzgerald, Anthony Corsby, Carl Green, Gregor Sobko, Gary Mellor, Lindsay Richard Easton, Michael Sweet, Graham Redfern, Justin Fever, Anthony Jackson, Carol Laskos, Jason Fogarty, Ivars Bamanis, Alan Smith, Neville Hurd.
We remember the dead and fight for the living. Jeffrey Davis, Adrian Smith, Henry Jones, Scott Harrower, Maxwell Lewis Gray, Christopher Crammond, Vince Richards, Stanley Cooper, Richard Brown, Benjamin John Edge, Mike Barron, Steve Wheaton, Mikislav Slawski, Philip Warden, Kenneth Drake, Lacoma Grimes, Marius Andrus, David Webb, Rhys Barker, David Newell, Lee Grundy, Stanley Rowson, Anthony Geldard, Malcolm Woodman, and Kirk Michael.
We've now got a special reader. Cameron Minchell died in 2013 when he was only 16, and his little sister Millie would like to read out something she's written about him. Billy McDonald.
remember the dead, agricultural and fishing workers who have died since April 2010. Sean Bennett, Thomas Postlethwaite, Peter Coots, Colin Elwood, William Wilson Boo, Andrew Davis, Wilfred Bennion, Mark Coates, Stephen Rimmer, Tony Hayton, Peter Hilton, Thomas Martin Sanderson, Wilfred Platt, George Ritson, Keith Knowles, Michael Padley, Matthew Drummond, James Tatham, Stephen Toppin, Martin Leverton, Edward Evans. We remember all of the dead, and we commit ourselves to fight for the living, so no one is killed by work, in any workplace, anywhere.